Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming out. This is a great turnout. I know it's getting to the point of the term when you're tired, so thank you for coming out. So it's such a pleasure for me to introduce to you and welcome Theo De Meyer to Knowlton as part of the Baumer Lecture Series. De Meyer lives and works in Ghent, Belgium, often collaborating with his partner, Stephanie Everard, and others under the name Stand van Zaken, translated as either state of play or state of affairs. This collaborative entity is described as, I quote, a modular organism that brings together specialists across various fields. It thrives on fluidity and adaptability, continuously reshaping itself in response to the contexts and encounters that inspire its projects, unquote. So work of Stan van Zaken, which you'll see, but first for me personally is an expression of so much energy and also inquisitiveness. Regardless of scale, projects push meanings and formal outcomes that emerge from juxtaposition or placement, or maybe I can just say more broadly, relationships, both formal and social. And speaking of energy, De Meyer is also incredibly prolific, with 29 completed projects ranging in scale from object to urban, completed in the last 9 years. This is in addition to teaching at the ETH and KU Leuven, and also at summer schools like Porto Academy and Parabase in Copenhagen. I'm very excited that he's here to share his work and stories behind the work with the Knowlton community. And I want to also mention that he has a recently published kind of 2-volume, beautiful book documenting his work that he super generously donated to the library here at Knowlton. So that's being cataloged and you can all enjoy that very soon. Please welcome me in, please join me in welcoming Theo De Meyer.
Do I have 2 micros? Okay. So, is this clear? Is this loud? Yeah. First of all, for all the students, I received a sweater. I really love it, so thank you for it. I only have 1 sweater for this week, so I will wear it. First of all, thank you for inviting both you and the university. It's for me a real pleasure to visit America. To tell you, Stand van Zaken, we always wonder if we have to translate it as a business name. But Stand van Zaken, as said, is a state of play or a state of affairs between different kind of persons. Also a state of play, it's a moment in time, and maybe this moment in time you can read it as being my practice seen as up until today. So the lecture, what you will see, is a continuation of repeatedly changing over the years. So the title of the lecture we like to give is The Way Things Go. And to start with, many of you will not know me personally, but to give you a little bit of context, this is our daughter. And somehow, Stephanie and I, we are a couple, by the way, we like to look at things, and we love tubes. I don't know why we love tubes, but even our daughter knows that, so sometimes she likes to pose in front of it. What you see is me as a young kid, young person, as 12 years, starting to do a technical school where we did small mailboxes, where we grew up into constructions of houses. But also Stephanie has a time period where she has been working as a young person in the atelier of Maarten van Severen. Maarten van Severen is a Belgian designer. And somehow what I wanted to tell is that Stephanie and I share the love of making things, share materials. And to show you this one, this is the first birthday cake that I got from Stephanie. And what you see are basically 3 pieces of foam. When you are an architect, you are ordering, you are gathering materials. When you have a kid, you have playing blocks. And all of a sudden, maybe somehow on this cabinet of ours, it looks like a sofa. So we were wondering, can't we make a sofa? And if you think about how sofas work or how chairs work, they have a certain angle, and a triangle can handle an angle for having a lounge chair or a normal chair. We started to make it in real life, and we found types of foam which has a hard density, a soft density, and a density on top. But the only issue is if you put it too long in the sun, it's not durable anymore. So we found a company who was coating the sofa. Lucky accident, actually. The whole thing all of a sudden looked like marble. And it was never intended to be marble, but we just wanted to show the materials. And somehow, because of these colors and because of the shapes, people tend to think that we love postmodernism. We do love postmodernism. What you see is a beautiful vase of Ettore Sottsass. But if you really think about Ettore Sottsass and how he works, this is a drawing he made in his hospital bed, that the pills he had to take every day, he had to draw on top of each other, or he was drawing it on top of each other. It became this totem, and after this totem, it became also a pepper mill, because he discovered that the circle was perfectly in the hand. So what we do love indeed geometry, we do love shapes, but also we do like how things work. And basically, the sofa is now in our living room, enjoyed by our daughter again. But the nice thing is that it doesn't have a backside, so you can put it in the center of the room. So what happened, we showed this sofa during an exhibition, and inside a lecture, there was one person asking, could you show the sofa? And then we thought about, maybe it's nice to show all the furniture that we have been doing over the years. The point was that we discovered that the sofa was Stephanie and I. You see, the table was for me personally, but the cabinet was together with somebody else. Then you had Dorzon, you had actually a lot of people and friends collaborating on different pieces, but somehow they looked like a family. People get confused because people like to know, who are you, what do you do, what is your business plan? But in this case, there was not really a business plan. We just had a bunch of collected furniture, and we started to name all the people who were involved, also photographers, writers. And the booth was called A Booth with Things, which is also literally translated as a stand van zaken. But the stand van zaken is a moment in time between different collaborations. This is maybe the best well-known work of ours, and it is a greenhouse. And to give you a little bit more context, this greenhouse is part of a bigger part. And this is actually the place where I grew up as a kid. So in the back you see a smaller greenhouse, which was my grandparents. All of a sudden the business grew until this was 30,000 square meters of greenhouse. But during the 90s, beginning 2000, there was a financial crisis where gas prices went up and tomato prices went down. So basically many of the businesses in the neighborhood, 70%, stopped and had to demolish the structures. But somehow it was also the proud of the family, let's keep one part. And the reason why this part was kept is because there all the tomatoes were brought in, it was sorted out and then brought out to sell. But it was just in the idea that maybe one day somebody can use it or we can do something with it. But the thing that happened with it, for 7 years long, people threw their trash inside, the neighbor was putting their caravan inside, and that's actually what's going to happen. So it was period of COVID, and then all of a sudden, everybody know what happened in COVID. There was a kind of a lockdown. We have a small apartment. So we asked our family, can't we go there and put up our tent? We started to clean everything out, and what was first an abandoned place, all of a sudden became a new place, which a kind of a beautiful structure. It was also quite intimidating. So it was quite fast in the first idea what to do with it. So what we do is, it was so big, and there was this thing, if we would go to our family with a full plan, this is what we are going to do, we will get a no. So we started step by step, getting a hand, not taking an arm immediately. So the first thing what we added is this curtain in the center, and we promised that we would stay behind the curtain, and the other part was also maybe for others to use. The drawing was very quickly, it was very functional, and what we wanted is a place to sleep. We wanted to have a kitchen, and the wildest dream was to have a swimming pool. We have been looking how my parents have been doing it, my father and my grandfather, so every new structure within the structure was made with bricks. It was made with bricks because it was cheap, it was local, and also it could handle a certain rain and weather conditions. So for us, the obvious thing to do was to continue with this idea of bricks. So very quickly, this brick sketch became a brick drawing. And what we started was, this first summer already, we started to put blocks on top of each other. I tell you, or sometimes I tell, that I'm good with my hands. I am good with my hands, but I'm not a craftsman. So we tried to figure out a system that we could stack stones on top of each other. We glued them in this case, but the only rule that we had is not to cut any stones. So this is the shape that you see. All of a sudden, after this first period, it was really wonderful to see that an empty place became a kind of construction site where we started to live in. We started to call friends who started to help. And then even our daughter started to find her pleasure. But we also had friends at the same time who were skeptical and rather, why should you do it? Isn't it too warm? It's not your place. Should you invest money inside of it? Isn't it too rough? But after this first summer, it started to become like a small living room. We made mistakes, not necessarily made mistakes, but the drawing was so quickly that we understood that in one corner it was warmer than the other. So we started to adapt our structure after the first summer. Also, COVID was not summer, but it was longer than expected. So we started to make insulated cabinets to protect our food and our fridge. We made a fridge, we made an extra planter behind our kitchen because then we have our vegetables directly at our kitchen. The summer, the conditions are quite rough inside the greenhouse, so actually we sleep on mattresses and we fold our blankets in the cabinet next to it. We started to introduce a stove, but the stove, it's impossible to heat the whole greenhouse, so we started to think about furniture with high backrests. And even the swimming pool, it was a wild dream, but it can become 50 degrees, so the warm water there, it's not such a good idea. So the swimming pool became all of a sudden a shower. So again, it's good that to invite people, and I think we are in the realm of Instagram, and it's good to connect people with Instagram. And for example, this is a friend who started to help and all of a sudden added this bench around the column. We had another friend who added a lamp behind on top of the table. Or we have an artist from New York, which is Serban Ionescu, who is also playful in there. The reason why I say it's good, Instagram, somehow it's good, or it can be good, is because in this case, my friend in the yellow cap, it's Manuel Grunewald, he asked me, like, look, I saw on Instagram a nice artist, shall we contact him to have an atelier visit? And we had really a nice atelier visit. And after that day, he asked, like, look, I have a subsidy from the government, I need to spend it within 1 month, shall we do something together? And this is what we have been making in the greenhouse. What you see is basically the first time that somebody asked me in that period to do something else than purely architecture, and the question was more to make a kind of a scenography for art pieces on top of it, and I was even allowed as a non-artist to make something like an artwork itself. But the interesting part is, like, my mind was thinking, I need to sleep, I need to eat, I need to wash myself. But then it was clear that somehow it was also good to look at the neighbors and what was happening around the greenhouse. And what we really liked is that all of a sudden there was a Spanish influence house with a Versailles garden in front of it, with a Dutch figure, which is maybe part of the Athens realm. And somehow it felt that somebody likes to go on holidays and like to bring the holiday back to their home. It's also how we think about nature, or what we like to think about, what we see in nature. But it's also about romanticizing nature, and Manuel is a painter, so he painted, or he put a painting of Monet, and he put a person of leisure in front of it. And if I think about it, what was very practical for my parents, for my family, like this water well, was for us kids pure pleasure. So this interesting thing is, for me, or there it was a kind of a switch in seeing, like in this small village, it's a small fountain, but it's the only fountain where you can have drinking water for the whole village. But this object is so powerful is that there is also a bar around it, and there is a lot of things happening around the object. So I made a fountain with tubes, with skylights, a tube, a skylight, and a tube. And I also liked, like, for example, the stepping part is maybe also this little bridge that I had been knowing as being a kid. So as said, we go to Italy. We stole a small piece of cacti, and the cacti are so happy in the greenhouse. But even at night, it becomes something special, because it also becomes like almost an island within an island. And it's all because we put this kind of huge lantern next to it, who's flashing the light against the green. And somehow, I don't know, I told you that I like tubes, but I also like light, I like public spaces. And this light could become an inspiration for another light, or this light can become even a bigger light. And this light becomes even a festival in Palm Springs, California. So what you see there is also a kind of group of objects, but it was on an airport, so the obvious thing to do was to think about an airport. And what you see here is a terminal, and the terminal was to be thought about also how to light system, or how to bring the DJ towards a part of it. We like things like ventilation tubes, and we like somehow in airports, it's not necessarily designed architecturally, but very functionality. So we brought like smokestacks. But then there was also the naming or the time of the airplane. So in the back, we put a big screen, or we made a kind of big screen where all the airplanes in the background, they were shown where they were flying to. So again, this is kind of bringing objects together. But if you see the center part, it's also a part where people can go up more in a kind of pyramid way. But it was for us also important, or it was a really nice moment where somebody in a wheelchair, she was put up in there. And so basically she became on eye level with everybody. Okay, it didn't have a slope, but there was a huge inclusivity happening there. So I like things that are not very clear what it is now. And in a gallery, we put just a kind of bricks on top of it, facing actually 40 centimeters high, so it became actually a bench. But the people were not sure if they were allowed to sit on it, yes or no. And that's also what's happening in public space. So we can make a bench, yes, but eventually maybe people are just sitting on sidewalks. And that's what's happening also in the greenhouse. We had to do another exhibition. This exhibition was in the EPFL in Lausanne, where they asked us to make a kind of reading room. So basically we put 3 elements inside that room. One was a fountain, one was the light, and the other one was a kind of a motor full of plugs, which we could imagine how nice it would be on a square in the city center, that you have a column or a monument full with plugs that you can charge your iPhones for teenagers which are 16, which is always a problem. So we started to come up with this title, Meet Me at the Fountain, and we were really in love with this Meet Me idea, because also in Sydney, where you see this huge Coke sign, and then there was this moment, Meet Me at the Fountain, and you saw an image of 2 persons kissing underneath that sign. So we continued in that idea. In Meet Me at the Apple Tree, for example. And it's basically just a gathering of elements that we see in public space. And even on the highway, it's maybe the worst place ever, but it was made very nice with only 2 benches and a planter next to it. So maybe that's also enough to think about public space. We continue on working on it, and of course we like objects, but I'm still an architect. So the important thing is to bring it inside the environment. And here we had to make in Ghent, due to the regulations, a terrace for a restaurant can only be removable by 1 person. But here we made it out of foam. And the nice thing with foam is that basically all the buildings in nowadays structures, you can insulate your facade, you can bring in nice ornaments, and then you can plaster it afterwards. We find a person specialized in Greek facades, which is not always common to work with, but we really loved it because he really thought about how to treat the material and which glue can I use in terms that it's not melting the foam. He cut it everything by hand, and then it became something like this. People got shocked in the beginning in terms of that they did not know what to think about, and then there was a headliner in the newspaper, is this now art, kitsch, or design? But for me, it was interesting to see that this was debate, but in the city, this is never debated. And I think it's even worse in that sense. But maybe it's also enough to put something next to it that changes totally the perception of what we are looking at. And I'm also like to upscale things, and I like the idea of upscaling, and I see this is a work by Klaus Oldenburg, and even better when you see kids playing on top of it, it makes it so much better. So traveling is good, and while designing, I was traveling to Istanbul, to the Hagia Sophia, and the staircase became another staircase for a project. But even the ceiling of a painting of Giotto, we could wonder that all of a sudden we take a blue corrugated sheets and we use gray screws in order to highlight almost stars in the ceiling. But unfortunately, the client that we thought we went already too far enough, but we will keep it for something else. But the real reason why the client asked us was not, I think, because we are so good designers, but they wanted to call us because they had a greenhouse and they saw on Instagram that we also had a greenhouse. So they wanted us to do something with their greenhouse. But we proposed to do something with their greenhouse in the future, gold and an outside sleeping room in the back. And that's what's also the thing about what's happening in the greenhouse. Something else, what we do, or like what we have, we go to Italy, and we tend to go every year to the same place. And what you see is a long plot. And in front you have a house, small house where you do the laundry. Then you have 2 houses where you sleep, 2 extra houses where you wash. There's a swimming pool in between. There's a totally other side, there is the kitchen, and then there is another room next to it. So what was really wonderful is that they have a long plot, but they use the whole plot by bringing all the programs on the other side. So each time when you go to the kitchen, you are at the kitchen, but then you go back home like you went home from the restaurant back to your room. But also there's a certain expression, because in that space it was a house designed by Gaetano Pesce. And on top of the roof there is the shower. You have a kind of an overview of that domain. And then there is this kitchen. But for us it's totally not about Gaetano Pesce, it's more of the realm that we are in. And that's also in the greenhouse, is all of a sudden this idea of having a kitchen in the greenhouse that was way too warm, so we make a kind of summer kitchen. But then of course the summer kitchen was way too far on the other side of the greenhouse, so we made a trolley of the old bed of my sister. And then it was nice to have a kind of a mirror pattern so we can reflect the sky, because it's rare to have a ceiling without ceiling. But also this card is again something that we know from when we were young. And also in this idea of farming, and you have to consider that Italy in the whole, what I was showing is the heel of Italy. It's a farming land as well. And we do like the logic of a farmer, because here in this case it's just putting bricks on top of each other in order to support the tree. But if I look to my grandparents, this is his lookout, and the roof is almost blowing away, so he put a rope until the weight. But my grandmother wanted to make it a little bit nicer to put a plant in front of it. So every place, every flat surface is an opportunity to make it nicer, to make it better. And even maybe something like this, to have some folders for an exhibition, put it on top of the trolley of the worker there, and you have a nice base, very small, very quickly. So it's a game of play inside this greenhouse. And again, what was for us very functional in the beginning became, after the meeting with the artists, something else. And today it's a way broader system of all things that are happening there. And within this thinking, like first this functionality, we started to glue bricks, but we started to understand as well that this greenhouse, we are not the owners, so probably one day we'll have to go out. So we started to think about not to glue the bricks anymore, just attach them next to each other, so maybe one day we can keep all the materials and move it to another place. We started to experiment with this kind of temporary ideas, because if you want to go higher, you need to have more stability. And the stability we get in ideas like, okay, how can we maybe temporarily stabilize things? The nice thing is with exhibitions, they are temporary, so this is only 1 month. But by doing this system, afterwards we can bring the doors back and give it to my mother, her new garden. And maybe the bricks can be used for the new garden entry and the fountain. And of course it looks maybe not completely, or it looks confronting with the old building, but at the same time the garden is from my mother, her sanctuary. So it's something that she's really enjoying, apart from shape as well. Continuing in this idea of how to treat materials and how to maybe in a non-demolishing way. Having systems in order to go higher, or maybe inspiration on how to bring things and materials together. And even while building with students, it is nice to see all of a sudden as a reference, as an architect, a reference of Schinkel, which can maybe become also the idea of something to prevent falling from. I will drink a small. So as said, I like to look back to things, not necessarily in a sentimental way, but more in understanding, in also with my family, why are bricks used. And this is my school, for example, and what we learned there is that every year or every semester that we had to build exercises, but they had to be demolished afterwards. So every year there was a moment of putting up materials and bringing them back. So we had a clear rule on never to cut any brick, But we also had a clear rule to keep it clean constantly and to take care of your materials. So this whole idea, or this whole realm that we tend to talk about, I'm using or reusing materials. In that time, there was no idea of reusing materials. I mean, there was no such thing as leftover materials. Materials were materials, period. It's not because you have a big panel and you have a leftover piece that it's a leftover material. It's material. So you can, with this material, you can go in a constant flux of doing and redoing. But it's also, and I once brought it in a lecture, but I like the idea of Le Corbusier. I don't know, probably we all know Le Corbusier, but in my school I was really trained with Le Corbusier that things had to be functional and buildings should be like machines. And thinking about it, looking back again, is that I have been raised in between machines. But another idea of Le Corbusier is that in durability terms, and this is also where we come back, is that nothing is forever, and a church today can be something else tomorrow. So a building should be kind of an infrastructure free from every infill that it can handle. But in our city, for example, this building was considered with the same idea. It was a construction or kind of shell, but free for everybody to use. But what really happened is that there was no real caretaker of doing things. And again, with the greenhouse, if there is no caretaker, it's becoming kind of a mess. So within this whole idea of Le Corbusier, if you look to this bathroom from Villa Savoie, this is made by his collaborator, Albert Frey. Albert Frey, maybe you have heard from Palm Springs, the mid-century houses. They even call it the Albert Frey Blue, but he actually, when he left Le Corbusier, he made a book in search of a living architecture. It was very interesting because he went to the desert, an abandoned place, and he started to look in all kinds of industrial materials and how to bring things together, and the ceiling had to be blue because the sky is blue, and a constant idea on how to live in a new way of beauty. And this is also how we like to look to our greenhouse. But there is a great or a huge suspicion when things are designed in a good way, or I think it's in a good way. But for example, we lost this competition because the client think it was too much or too extravagant, but somehow true, and we lost the competition, and we were happy that somebody else asked us to do a bar. But for us, it's not so much about the shape and the color and the pleasure only, but it's also, if you think about inclusivity, inclusivity means that either a young person or a person older of age can come together in all the kind of same atmosphere of what was once a brown bar. So for us, there is also a confusion how old or how new are the things we are looking at. So in that sense, it's upgrading. We like to make things ourselves because we just like to think about, or we like to understand how materials work. And if I see how I was trained in school, this was our Bible. It was Constructing Architecture, and it was a very Swiss ETH book full of details like this. Wonderful details, good details, but as a student I didn't understand really a thing about it. And what I did was going on Google to find very simple ideas on how to explain construction. And I like this drawing a lot because this is also how we draw in AutoCAD. We draw materials, not lines, and we try to, maybe this beam is a beam in a block which we can stretch, and then we almost make compositions on how to build things. So it's also a way in order to make it very understandable for others to build it. And that's what I like, very simple ideas, the most straightforward idea I like. And this is, for example, a work of John Baldessari, and his instructions were, throw 3 balls in the air, take a picture when they're all in one line. And of course, this is a chair, and somehow, I don't know, my products are difficult to sell. Because what happened here, I made a chair of tiles, and it's very cheap tiles, and every time somebody saw the chair, they said, wonderful idea, I have chairs in my backyard, I will make myself this chair. So I had to reconsider how to treat it and how to deal with it. So I also started to think about instructions. Maybe I sell the drawing and not the product. If you think about it, architects, we do sell drawings. So We were invited to do an exhibition in Sydney, which was with a good friend and curator of, called Guillermo Fernandez Abascal. And we came up with the idea on maybe the most durable idea of an exhibition is to not ship anything, any material overseas. We will ask architects from around the world to come up with one drawing with instructions. We send those instructions to the School of Sydney, and the students will build it without control of the architect himself. Which is interesting, but also super difficult, because architects somehow they tend or like to have control, and now they had to release control, have to think about this kind of drawing. But it was really working well, and for example, you see the poles on the back, it was Sam Shermayev who had the idea on one post-it. You need to have a pole of 2 meters high, it needs to have a function on the top, a base in the bottom, and a table in the center. These are your instructions, and the student had pleasure with them, and the language which came out of it. The interesting part, it was a Sam Shermayev, but also not a Sam Shermayev, so there was an interesting collaboration in that one. So what you saw were drawings confronted with the workpieces, and our instructions was how to make a frame, find yourself a panel, put another panel on top of it. You are free to turn and twist as much you like. So this idea of instructions became super interesting, because I think it's very important to work local, and local in terms of also context. But if you work, for example, in Palm Springs on the other side of the world, I have no clue what kind of materials they are there. So we also came up with just instructions, a manual on how to do things. And for example, a few words that we have been writing is that this work is an artistic installation and should be conceived and built with care to ensure its success. Precision is key. The back should be as beautiful as the front, so don't cheat. Use materials for what they can do, but in an unexpected way. If you put a tube vertically, it becomes a column, for example. Spiral tubes should appear structural even if they are not. And a good process reflects in its results, and I'm very sure that it's always in this case. So, and that's what happened, for example, also in Palm Springs. Because you could consider yourself as an architect, as a professional, but all of a sudden, there are many professionals coming together in such a place. So we are training ourselves in how can we work in the best possible way to not get frustrated if something is not done like we wanted to have it done. So what we proposed here is basically 36 columns that can be used by whoever needs it to make infrastructure, rather infrastructural music, or we put planters on top of it. Planters, we wanted to have a fountain, we liked sculptures, we also liked the smoke, again. The sponsor needed to have a place. What was also very nice is to finally recognize all the people who have been working on it, as well as students. And all of a sudden it becomes like pillars with things on top of it, which has a kind of very specific scale to it. Then of course, you had the technical parts. The DJ needed to have a roof. And all of a sudden what was wonderful, and we draw architecture, but all of a sudden there are 3,000 persons inside that space. But there was also a day and night situation in which we wondered that the existing buildings were just showing or putting out light, so it looked like the building was on fire. And of course it's again control, but nobody was allowed to climb on it, but of course everybody does it. We liked light. And all of a sudden it was something that was very specific to everybody has been working on that project. The reason why I show it, it was also a very important moment to us as being Stand van Zaken. But in this case, for example, we received the tubes from a company and they took them back, or they wanted to take them back in order to use them for the sewage pipes. So the rule that we had is that we are not allowed to attach anything towards the columns. We could only stack things on top of each other. But the company said you can have them, and now it's a street inside the festival which is called Horst Arts and Music Festival in Belgium, in which artworks are confronted with new works of other architects, and so that's what's happening there. So this is what it is, and maybe this is also a work after that, or try to motivate myself. And the amount of times that I'm confronted with the artist world, that you as an architect should make your base as low-key as possible because it should not interfere too much with the work of art. I like to reverse the idea here, is that claiming architecture as a base, I do not mind what's on top, is that you as an architect can provide a certain infrastructure where things can happen around. And that is what's happening there in what we consider our greenhouse. And there was also a thing, or I heard from a colleague, like, nice Theo, I like your work, but maybe too many temporary ideas, but don't worry, we also experiment with architecture, and I would love to even make it bigger. But even a house is never forever, it's also temporary. Sorry for the picture, I just like the contrast in between things, but it was my father when he built the house, all of a sudden now the house is something abandoned. But also even this is not forever. The whole project that I have been showing is also now for sale because our family also had to let go now at a certain moment. So we have to rethink also where we have to go with the whole world we have been building there. But we liked that everything was detached. And we learned so much about this one already now, and also politically wise, and also how our Flanders or Belgium system works, is that in Belgium, 70% of all greenhouses are either empty or demolished. Basically, they tell you, if you want to keep the greenhouse, you need to use it for farming, but the greenhouses are always too old to use it for farming. Result is that you can use it for living, but what the city really wants is to go back to a world where there are no greenhouses, no industry, to go back to the paintings that we have been making already in the early 1900s on what our Flemish landscape is. So also if you want to reconstruct something, it's also the question, how far do you go back? And maybe sometimes we like to go too far back in the memory of how things should be. But also the industry of today, or this kind of greenhouses, is maybe also a heritage that could be kept alive. So that is what we do now, is our Stand van Zaken today, or our state of affairs, is we have been making this publication, and we call it the moving spirit. First of all, that we have to move from our kitchen to our bedroom, but also now we are documenting every part of material to rethink what we can do and to put it on a truck to maybe build the new project, either somewhere in the field or on top of the roof. So this is about how the way things go, and the way things go is also how things go in unexpected turns, but we have the pleasure of sharing it and being able to be doing it. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Theo. Thank you. I know that Theo is very generous with answering any questions, anything you're curious about. Please go ahead.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, it was also interesting with the questions we had today is how to start a practice, for example. And I think that's also the realm of the way things go. When I was young, I thought that I have to have a vision on what I want in life, and that's what I need to work towards. But while doing, I understood, or I started to understand, that it doesn't work like this, actually. So the way we do things, or what we learn to do things, is while we have a consistent job, we started to do things next to it. And one is always leading to the other, but in a very unexpected way. And somehow, I don't know if this what I'm saying right now, if it's relating towards the past, but I think, or maybe it's my personality, is to just understand very clearly where things are coming from. And if you understand those things, it will help you in shaping towards something new. But maybe you have to bring it a little bit broader, your question on what your interest on. Is it the question on why I like to look back, or if it's important to look back, or?
Yeah, like why you like to, I think from the lens of like how you've kind of crafted like your design process.
Well, there's also another debate, referencing. As architects, should we reference? Or we have, for example, a famous quote by Valerio Olgiati, reference-less or non-reference architecture. So you're not allowed to reference. And it's also a postmodern thought, like, should we reference the older masters in order to do something new or to make a kind of an abstraction? But somehow in this memory, what I like with the memory is that if you look to the fountain, for example, it's very clear that it's a fountain. So it's also helped me to shape something from that memory. So the game is almost to present you something that is readable even by my grandmother as a way of speaking. And bringing all these kind of things together, it feels, or it felt for myself, or I'm speaking now for myself, but basically we are Stefanie and I. But it's a very nice way, while designing, all of a sudden it reminds of something, or we can go in a different direction, and it's way more easy to make your own choices in that sense. It's way more difficult to design something that's not exist, but that's, for example, my approach of doing. Yeah. And also there are other quotes. I don't know. I'm not into quotes necessarily, but it was nice to hear, for example, Andrea Branzi. Maybe also something I have to look up. And this exhibition of Meet Me at the Fountain is the question is, the future, how should we treat it? Should we treat it high-tech? It's not the answer, because we thought that we needed to have USBs, so we put our house full of USBs, but we don't use USB anymore. But low-tech is neither the answer, but maybe the question, there is something in between. And what I also like is not to reinvent the future or maybe rework towards the past, but maybe is bringing things that are today together in a kind of new constellation and maybe have a kind of a new perception of it. And I think that's also part of the material game. So in the end, it's not one way or the other. It's not that we reference or we scale. I think it's a combination of all those kind of things together, which is helping us forward in the design process, without feeling that we are designing in the end, but almost like composing. Is it helpful somehow? Yeah, because sometimes I feel like I'm talking in a way of an abstraction, no?
I thought it was great. Like creating like a new constellation. I think I like that a lot. Like that idea that it's like we have all this information at our hand. It's just that as designers, it's how we configure it. We can make something new.
Yeah, but also, like, for example, this fountain. It consists out of a tube, a skylight, a tube, and a skylight. So I'm then wondering, to make a shape like this, it's incredibly expensive, it takes time, and you need to find somebody who has to do it. Well, actually it exists. And many of the time you find yourself in a moment where you are looking towards a solution, but the solution is already there. And for example, a column like this one, what I would do, I would buy a ventilation tube, put it straight, put it full of concrete, and I'm finished. So I like to think in this way, is in a very easy, also the farmer's logic, what I've been talking about, is in a very simple means you can react towards something, and which I like. For example, the panels with the holes here, love it, but somebody had to design the shape. Somebody had to think a lot of time, is it too much shape? Should we do it in a pattern, yes or no? And I would like to find just like a really nice mesh to put it against it, and it makes my life a little bit more easy. I don't say that it should be done like this, but it's more my way of doing in a kind of quickness and fastness. So yeah.
Thank you.
Pleasure. No worries, was probably a long day. Anders? Mm.
Yeah, I'm kind of curious where your kind of your personal image comes from. You've mentioned some characters in your life, your mom, some artist friends, and just talking about these panels. I'm kind of curious your opinion where the architecture kind of starts and where some of these other fields kind of pick up or exchange.
Well, that's a very broad discussion, and probably they're already talking about it forever, about when is it architecture, when is it art. Basically, I don't, or it gives me more comfort to not think about it too much, but all of a sudden it happens, and I feel that other people are more struggling with it than I'm struggling with it within myself. And I feel it also in commissions, and I said it already before in our talking together, is that architects all of a sudden think that I'm an artist, but artists think that I'm an architect, which is also fair. But what I do like, and maybe it's also something to consider, is that I do discover that if you have arts or architecture, there are certain rules where you need to play within that field. And also arts and architecture, they are both very protective within their fields. So the moment you step out of it, something interesting happens. And I'm also happy to do that in that sense. And I do love, I do think it's very important, because also in the architecture language, I learned to speak the language. I also have been working at universities where it was very straightforward architecture language. But talking to my friends, all of a sudden I heard them saying like, what are you talking about, first of all? Or being in the greenhouse where my grandmother, I would love to share things with her, and you start to communicate in a different language with each other. And opening this door, it was more of a pleasure than a burden. So if you asked me, should I go now back towards purely architecture or purely arts, I'm in a constant fight with myself on what should I do with this one. And the only answer I can give to myself is that I should continue working in this kind of confusion which I'm in right now, which is for me personally valuable thing to at least research. And again, it's not saying or imposing that one thing should be another, because I'm also highly respectful to architects or artists who are really the protectors of their field, because it's also something to say about. So yeah, this is the world I'm in, actually. Okay, cool.
You've spoken a lot about the temporary nature of architecture, if it's the greenhouse, for instance, or installations. Installations in the greenhouse being something that will have to be moved at some point. Yet, I noticed that a lot of the materials that you choose are often associated with more of a permanent architecture. I wondered if you could speak to what is your thought process when you're picking materials for installations.
Is it also the question, why are all the materials new, or is it more why are you working with building materials, or?
I suppose why are you choosing like heavier building materials, concrete and brick, as opposed to like plank construction?
I think also a few things to connect, and that's also the reason why things come from. Farmer and bricks were just like, whenever something is, there was always behind the shed bricks, maybe one day, so it was just there. And as a kid, to be honest, I also went to technical school, not that I wanted, but I ended up there. But while doing, it was just there. But then I come from an architecture, from this world of bricks and beams, all of a sudden inside architecture, and I failed mathematics, but what I was good at, it was technical drawing and materials. So I started to feel in architecture, but maybe this is already the advantage of doing things. I ended up working in the office, which is called the Velderving-Tailleux, and this was a person who showed me, like, you can see this is actually more beautiful than you even think. So I was even training myself within that office on continuing with that materials. So somehow it was always there. And also, again, looking back, if it's there, maybe it's good to continue in that world. But what was also helpful for me is by doing things yourself And during that time, my budget could only take what I found, or my budget could only be in cheaper materials, which we call them cheap. But basically to work with them, it's not the material, but it's the time that it takes to take so much care for it, what makes it so expensive as well. So I think it's just a love, and what I like as well is that these materials are so straightforward. Like also in the book we write about it. In our greenhouse we have been stacking boxes for the tomatoes, and we could go in every direction with that because the size was a European size, and the measurement should be like this. But bricks also work like this. So many of those industrial materials, you can put them in different ways and put them in constellations. So after a while you start to know that this brick fits on that brick and this beam goes together with this one. So the thinking while designing starts immediately from the material. With all those things you make something, instead you draw something and then we are going to look how to make it. So for me mentally it's very helpful to have this kind of library of ideas in which I can scout myself in shops and local ideas. So this is also my interest in, and what you see, it's a language, it's a personal language, and it's very much related towards Flanders. It's also why other people like maybe the work, I think, because it represents Flanders. But my interest is also to go abroad, and that's why I tried Palm Springs and Sydney and maybe some other places to see what happens if you totally use different materials which are local. The question is, will it become another language as well? So it's like also finding a way to do things. Yeah. Also, they come in their own expression, so I never need to choose color. I can just go in the realm, so they have 5 colors and I pick the nicest one. Or I pick the nicest one who comes together with the brick. So this is also maybe the state of play that we are in that sense. Yeah. Pleasure. Sorry for the students who were in the previous class, because the same question came and probably the answer will be a little bit the same. But what you see in the greenhouse, there was this moment that they have primary structure and you have secondary structure. So in this greenhouse was the brick is orange, this brick is not needed to use. But then I was completely freaking out for the swimming pool because the brick cannot hold the water pressure. So we needed to think in another material, and then I was like, struggling with myself, it's not the same, it should be the same. So you need to accept maybe that the concrete block in that specific case is a way better choice of using instead of the brick. So also color-wise, sometimes you can allow yourself to choose the best possible solution with that type of material for that situation. And that's how you continue through the process. So if you have your main structure, the orange brick, it's not so difficult to add another color, because then you can choose what fits very well together with the orange already. And many of the time, if I use steel, you need to paint it, but then you can choose not to paint it, you go galvanized. But maybe you find something that's just already painted and comes in 5 color, and then you try to find the nicest one. So maybe it's also about color. Don't worry too much about it. In the end, it is eclectic. But maybe it's not so much about the colors you use, but it's how things are related with each other, and as well in space and as well in scale, and how wood and concrete and steel comes together is maybe worth more concerning about than to concern if you choose the right color and if you are good within the taste of the project as such. And if you trust that for yourself, I'm faithful that you will make an amazing design. Thank you so much for all the attention and questions, and it was a pleasure.